17 men reported it. Not one line made it into the official log. The USS Harlan Moore was running anti-submarine patrol northwest of Midway, June 1942, 8 days after the largest naval battle in Pacific history. Something was keeping pace with the ship, moving through 40-degree water without equipment, without a vessel, at speeds no human being could sustain. 4 sailors were transferred within 72 hours. Their names do not appear in any transfer record. What did the United States Navy decide the world could not know? The Pacific in June of 1942 was not a place for questions. It was a place for orders, silence, and survival. The Battle of Midway had ended on June 7th. 4 Japanese carriers destroyed. The momentum of the Pacific War shifted in less than 4 days of fighting. What the official histories recorded was the scale of the victory. What they recorded less carefully was everything that followed. The patrols, the sweeps, the destroyer escorts running grids across waters still thick with wreckage, fuel slicks, and the dead. The USS Harlan Moore left Pearl Harbor on June 13th. Her orders were standard for the period: anti-submarine patrol along the Northwest Corridor, the same stretch of open ocean where Japanese submarines had been operating since the early months of the war. She carried 186 men, diesel-powered, rated at 24 knots in clean water. She also carried 3 civilian technicians, classified as acoustic monitoring specialists. Their names appear in the embarkation manifest. They do not appear in any document generated after June 15th. Lieutenant Commander Gerald Pruitt held the watch on the night of June 14th into the early hours of June 15th. His log entries for that shift are intact, filed, and available in the Naval Historical Center's Pacific Theater collection. They record weather conditions, heading, speed, 2 radar contacts that resolved as surface debris, and nothing else. What the log does not record is what Pruitt himself described weeks later in a letter to his brother that was partially redacted before delivery. A letter that survived because his brother kept the original envelope, censor marks and all. The letter, recovered by a naval historian in 1989 from a private estate sale in Pensacola, Florida, describes Pruitt standing at the port rail during his watch. The water temperature that night was recorded at 14 degrees Celsius, cold enough that any man overboard without a survival suit would be incapacitated within minutes. The Moore was making 17 knots. In the letter, Pruitt writes that he saw something moving alongside the hull, not floating, not drifting. Moving with the ship. He watched it for what he estimated as 4 minutes before calling the watch petty officer to confirm what he was seeing. Petty Officer Second Class Raymond Dollard confirmed it. So did the 2 other sailors on deck at that hour. None of them could identify what they were looking at. Pruitt describes a humanoid shape, arms moving, head above water, face turned toward the ship. No vessel, no equipment, no lights. Keeping pace at 17 knots in 14-degree water in the middle of the night, 300 miles from the nearest inhabited land. Pruitt did not log it. In the letter, he explains why in a single sentence. He writes that he did not know which regulation covered what he had just seen, and that he was not willing to be the officer who invented one. What followed, over the next 36 hours, suggests that Pruitt was not the only one thinking in those terms. Between the night of June 14th and the evening of June 16th, 16 additional crew members reported the same or a similar sighting to their section chiefs. The sightings were not simultaneous. They occurred across at least 4 separate watch rotations, involving men stationed at different points on the ship: the forward gun mount, the fantail, the starboard bridge wing, the engine room ventilation deck. The figure, in each account, was described in consistent terms: humanoid, unequipped, moving at speed alongside or just beneath the surface, always on the port side, always facing the ship. No 2 of these men were close friends. Several did not know each other by name, They had no opportunity to coordinate their accounts before each reported independently to a superior. The section chiefs did not forward the reports up the chain of command. 3 of them later said, in informal statements that never became official testimony, that they had not known what category to put the reports in. Captain Edmund Vassall received his first consolidated account of the sightings on the morning of June 16th. The moor was then approximately 290 miles northwest of Midway, running a southeasterly return leg. Vassall did not call a general muster. He did not issue a ship-wide statement. He summoned the 3 civilian acoustic technicians to his cabin, and he kept them there for approximately 2 hours. What was discussed in that meeting is not documented anywhere. That afternoon, Vassall transmitted a verbal report to Pacific Fleet Command via secure radio channel. The transmission was logged at the Pearl Harbor Communications Center as received at 14:22 hours Pacific time. The log entry records the sender, the timestamp, and the channel. The content field reads, Verbal Operational Report, Nature Unspecified. There is no follow-up acknowledgement. There is no record of any response. The report, by every available measure, was received and then set aside, filed in a category that generated no paperwork. The following morning, June 17th, 4 individuals were removed from the moor's roster. Seaman First Class Thomas Aldrich, Radioman Third Class Carl Pembroke, Gunner's Mate Second Class Walter Souza, and one of the 3 civilian technicians, whose name in the embarkation manifest appears as J.R. Hennessy. All 4 were transferred via a tender vessel that rendezvoused with the moor at approximately 0600 hours. The moor's log records the transfer as personnel reassignment, administrative. The tender's log for that date, held at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, contains no record of receiving those 4 individuals. They were not listed as casualties. They were not listed as deserters. They were not listed as transferred. They were, by every available record, simply no longer present, removed from one ship and never received by another. The question of what the Navy knew, and when, begins not with the sightings themselves, but with the acoustic monitoring program that placed 3 civilian technicians aboard the moor in the first place. In the spring of 1942, the United States Navy was running a classified hydrophone research program across several vessels operating in the Central and North Pacific. The program's stated purpose was the detection and classification of submarine engine signatures. Its operational files remain partially restricted under a 1953 National Security Review that was never formally closed. What is available shows that the moor was one of at least 6 destroyer escorts fitted with experimental passive listening equipment between April and June of 1942. The equipment recorded ambient ocean sound continuously during patrol operations. The recordings were stored on wire spools and returned to Pearl Harbor for analysis. Of the 6 vessels in the program, the moor's wire spools for the period June 13th through June 17th are the only ones not present in the Naval Historical Center's Acoustic Research Archive. The archive index lists them. The physical spools are not there. A handwritten notation on the index card reads, Transferred, Special Programs Office, July 1942. No Special Programs Office with that designation appears in any Navy organizational chart from that year. This is the detail that a naval archivist named Dorothy Calloway flagged in 1991 while cataloguing Pacific Theater acoustic research materials. Calloway was not investigating the moor specifically. She was compiling a finding aid for the entire hydrophone program collection. When she found the gap, she submitted an inquiry to the Naval Historical Center's Declassification Office. The response she received, a single typed paragraph on official letterhead, confirmed that the spools existed, confirmed that they had been transferred, and declined to specify where. The letter is dated March of 1992. It is the last document in the file. Calloway noted something else before she closed her finding aid. The wire spool index for the moor lists recording sessions by date and time. The final entry before the gap reads, June 14th, 2300 hours through June 15th, 0300 hours. 4 hours of continuous recording, taken during the same watch that Lieutenant Commander Pruitt was standing at the port rail. Whatever the hydrophone equipment picked up that night, propeller cavitation, biological sound, something moving through the water at speed alongside the hull, that recording was separated from the rest of the program's archive within 6 weeks of the patrol. The 3 civilian technicians responsible for that equipment were H.D. Farwell, listed as Senior Acoustic Analyst, T.B. Corcoran, listed as Recording Technician, and J.R. Hennessy, listed as Equipment Specialist. Farwell and Corcoran returned to Pearl Harbor with the ship on June 18th. Their subsequent assignments are traceable. Farwell transferred to a research station in San Diego in August. Corcoran was reassigned to a different vessel in the hydrophone program in September. Both men's personnel files contain a notation entered in July of 1942. Debriefed, special programs, clearance amended. Neither file explains what the debriefing covered or what the clearance amendment meant in practice. Hennessy is the problem. Hennessy left the moor on June 17th, transferred to the tender that left no arrival record. His personnel file at the National Archives contains 14 pages, standard length for a civilian contractor of his classification. 11 of those pages are present. 3 are listed in the file index as withdrawn for review with a date of September 1942. They have not been returned. His last recorded payroll entry is for the 2-week period ending June 14th. He was never paid for the final days of the patrol. A man who stopped being paid on June 14th, transferred off the ship on June 17th, received nowhere. 3 pages of his file pulled in September and never returned. The Navy's own records suggest that J.R. Hennessy ceased to exist as an administrative entity sometime during the same 72-hour window in which 17 sailors reported seeing something impossible in the water alongside his ship. The 3 enlisted men transferred with him present a similar pattern, though less stark. Thomas Aldrich's service record shows continuous active duty through the end of the war, but his unit assignments from June 17th through October 1942 list him as attached to Fleet Administrative Command, Pearl Harbor, a designation that appears on no organizational roster from that period. Carl Pembroke's record shows a medical evaluation conducted on June 22nd, 5 days after his transfer. The evaluation form is present. The physician's findings section is blank. Walter Sousa's record is the most straightforward. It simply ends. His last entry is the June 17th transfer notation. No discharge, no reassignment, no casualty report. His name appears once more in the historical record on a 1967 Veterans Administration inquiry response, which states that his records were unavailable due to the 1973 National Personnel Records Center fire. The fire was real. It destroyed an estimated 16 to 18 million military personnel files. It is also, for researchers familiar with mid-century Navy administrative practices, a remarkably convenient explanation for files that were already showing signs of deliberate management 25 years earlier. What none of this explains, what no administrative procedure, no wartime censorship protocol, no records file can account for, is the consistency of the 17 accounts themselves. These were not men prone to shared fantasy. They were working sailors on a combat patrol in an active war zone, running on 4-hour watch rotations, sleep-deprived, alert to genuine threats. The Pacific in June of 1942 contained real dangers: submarines, mines, aircraft, the psychological residue of a battle that had ended 8 days before. These men knew the difference between a hallucination and something that needed to be reported, and they reported it, separately, in consistent detail, to superiors who did not know what to do with what they were hearing, and who, in the end, did nothing, which is itself a form of decision. The port side of the hull. Always the port side. Face turned toward the ship. There is a category of wartime administrative action that military historians refer to informally as a soft disappearance. It is distinct from a court-martial, a medical discharge, or a casualty designation. It leaves no single document that can be challenged or appealed. Instead, it operates through the accumulation of small omissions, a transfer logged but not received, an evaluation form left blank, a payroll entry that simply stops. Each individual gap, examined in isolation, looks like clerical error. Examined together, they describe a decision. The 4 individuals removed from the moor on June 17th were not the victims of paperwork failures. They were the subjects of a coordinated administrative erasure, one that required the cooperation of at least 3 separate Navy officers across Pearl Harbor. This is the conclusion that Commander Elliot Brass reached in a privately circulated paper written in 1984, after 30 years of naval service that included 2 tours as a records officer in the Pacific Fleet Administrative Command. Brasser was not a conspiracy theorist. He was a bureaucrat who understood exactly how Navy paperwork moved, and he recognized in the Moore file the signature of a process he had seen used, though never on this scale, during his own career. His paper, which was never submitted for publication, identifies what he calls the routing anomaly. The fact that all 4 transfer records across 3 different administrative categories show the same unusual notation format, the same abbreviated authorization code, and the same absence of a receiving unit confirmation. The probability of 4 independent clerical errors producing identical anomalies, Brasser calculated, was negligible. Someone had used a template. The authorization code, a 6-digit alphanumeric string appearing on all 4 documents, does not correspond to any standard Navy administrative code from the period. Brasser traced it through 3 separate Navy records manuals from 1941 through 1944 without finding a match. He did find one other document bearing the same code format, a 1943 transfer record for a different vessel, a minesweeper operating in the South Pacific, which also involved the removal of 2 crew members following an unspecified operational incident in waters near the Solomon Islands. Those 2 men also do not appear in receiving unit records. Brasser's paper ends without a conclusion. The final paragraph reads, in its entirety, "I am not in a position to characterize the authority that issued these orders. I am in a position to say that whoever issued them understood Navy administrative procedure at a level that suggests institutional, not individual, origin. These were not the actions of a single officer covering a mistake. These were the actions of an office." Captain Edmund Vassell retired from the Navy in 1951 with the rank of Rear Admiral, lower half. His retirement ceremony at Pearl Harbor was attended by 43 officers. His personnel file contains no disciplinary notations, no formal inquiries, and no record of any involvement in any classified program beyond his standard security clearances. He died in San Diego in 1968. His obituary in the San Diego Union Tribune describes him as a decorated Pacific veteran and a devoted family man. There is no mention of the USS Harlan Moore. Lieutenant Commander Gerald Pruitt left the Navy in 1946. He returned to civilian life in Columbus, Ohio, where he worked for 22 years as a civil engineer for the State Highway Department. He gave one recorded interview about his wartime service, a brief oral history collected by a local veterans organization in 1973. He speaks about Midway, about the patrols, about the men he served with. He does not mention the night of June 14th. The interviewer does not ask. The tape runs for 41 minutes. At the 38th minute, there is a pause of approximately 12 seconds before Pruitt says, "Some things you file away, you don't take them out again." The 17 sailors who reported the sightings were never formally interviewed as a group. Their individual accounts exist only in the informal statements collected years later by researchers who tracked them down through veterans networks and public records requests. Of the 17, 9 are confirmed to have died before any researcher located them. 4 could not be traced. 3 gave interviews, all in the 1980s, all describing the same figure in the same terms. And all 3, when asked directly what they believed they had seen, gave versions of the same answer. Not a Japanese swimmer, not a piece of debris, not a hallucination. Something that knew the ship was there and chose to stay beside it. None of the three men used the word creature. None of them used the word supernatural. One of them, Petty Officer Dollard, the man Pruitt had called to the rail that first night, located by a researcher in 1986 in a retirement community in Tampa, Florida, said something that the researcher noted verbatim in his field journal. It wasn't threatening us. That's what I could never explain to anyone. It wasn't trying to get aboard. It was just watching. Like it wanted us to know it was there. Dollard died 11 months after that interview. The field journal, along with the researcher's other materials on the moor, was donated to a small private archive in 1993. The archive's catalogue lists the collection. The physical materials have not been located since a building renovation in 2001. A hydrophone recording from the night of June 14th into June 15th. A field journal from 1986. 3 pages of J.R. Hennessy's personnel file. The wire spool index card with the handwritten notation pointing to an office that does not exist. Each one, taken alone, is a gap. Together, they describe the outline of something that was deliberately removed, a shape defined entirely by what is no longer there. The question that no administrative explanation can answer is the simplest one. Why the port side of the hull? Every account from every watch rotation places the figure on the port side. The Moor's port side faced northwest throughout the patrol, toward open ocean, away from the nearest land, away from any shipping lane. Whatever was in the water was not drifting with a current. It was not following the ship from a fixed position. It was positioned, and it stayed positioned, on the side of the ship that faced nothing. Here is what is certain. Between June 14th and June 17th of 1942, 17 crew members of the USS Harlan Moore independently reported sighting a humanoid figure moving alongside the ship's port hull in open ocean. The figure was observed across multiple watch rotations by men stationed at separate points on the vessel. No official log entry was made. Captain Edmund Vassell transmitted a verbal report to Pacific Fleet Command on June 16th. That report was logged as received and generated no response. On June 17th, 4 individuals, 3 enlisted men and 1 civilian contractor, were removed via tender and received by no unit in any available record. The acoustic recording made during the primary sighting window was separated from its archive within 6 weeks and has not been located since. Those are the fixed points. Everything else is inference, but not all inferences carry equal weight. The version of events most consistent with the documentary record is not a supernatural one. It is an institutional one. The most plausible explanation for what happened to the 4 transferred individuals is that they were placed in an informal holding status, separated from their units, debriefed under conditions that generated no paperwork, and then quietly reintegrated into the service under amended records. This practice, while not formally codified in any Navy regulation from the period, was operationally available to commands with sufficient administrative authority and sufficient motivation to use it. The motivation, in this case, is not difficult to identify. The summer of 1942 was the most sensitive period of the Pacific War. Midway had been a victory, but it was a fragile one, dependent on intelligence advantages that the Navy was determined to protect and on a public narrative of competent, rational military operations. A destroyer escort crew reporting an unidentified humanoid entity in open ocean was not a story that served any of those interests. The simplest institutional response was also the most effective one: remove the most vocal witnesses, classify the acoustic record, ensure that the commanding officer understood the appropriate scope of his official log, and allow the remaining crew's accounts to exist only as informal stories that no one would ever formally collect. What this explanation does not resolve is the sighting itself. The 17 accounts are consistent in detail, independent in origin, and produced by men with no evident motive to fabricate. The speed attributed to the figure, estimated by multiple witnesses at 30 or more knots, sustained over an extended period in cold open ocean, is not achievable by any human swimmer with or without equipment available in 1942. The hydrophone recording from that night, if it still exists, would be the only physical evidence capable of characterizing what was in the water. It does not appear to be accessible. The most scientifically defensible position, given what is available, is that the witnesses observed something they could not identify, described it accurately to the best of their ability, and were then managed by an institution that had no framework for the observation and no interest in developing one. The consequences of that management were specific and measurable. Thomas Aldrich spent 4 months in an administrative unit that does not appear in any organizational record. Carl Pembroke's medical evaluation from June 22nd contains no findings, which means either that nothing was found or that findings were recorded elsewhere. Walter Sousa effectively ceased to exist as an administrative entity, later absorbed into the 1973 records fire as a convenient explanation. J.R. Hennessy, the only person aboard with the technical knowledge to understand what the hydrophone had captured, was never paid for his last 3 days of work and was never received by any unit. Of the 4, he is the one for whom no subsequent trace has been found. Gerald Pruitt, who chose not to log the sighting, completed his service and returned to civilian life. Raymond Dollard, who confirmed the sighting verbally but never filed a formal report, lived until 1987. The pattern is consistent. Formal documentation was the trigger. Those who created it were removed. Those who stayed informal were left alone. The broader institutional consequence was silence, and silence in this case was self-sustaining. Without an official report, there was no official investigation. Without a finding, there was no category into which researchers could file a request. Dorothy Calloway's inquiry in 1991 reached the edge of the classified material and stopped, answered with a single paragraph that confirmed the gap without explaining it. Commander Brass's paper circulated privately and was never submitted for publication. The field journal containing Dollard's testimony disappeared during a building renovation. The archive holding what remains of the research collection has not been fully catalogued. The acoustic spools are listed in an index that points to an office that does not exist. The Navy did not need to destroy the evidence. It only needed to make the evidence sufficiently difficult to assemble that no one could put it together in one place, in one document, with one clear chain of attribution. That is a different kind of operation than a cover-up. A cover-up implies panic. What happened to the Moore file implies procedure, the calm, methodical application of administrative tools by people who had used them before and expected to use them again. Petty Officer Raymond Dollard, in his 1986 interview, said that the figure was watching, that it wanted the crew to know it was there. He had carried that observation for 44 years before anyone asked him about it, and he offered it not as a claim about what the figure was, but as a description of how it behaved. Whether or not that description is accurate, it is the most precise account available of the primary event, offered by a witness who had no reason to embellish and every reason, given what happened to the men who reported more formally, to say nothing at all. The sighting was never officially reported. The recording was never officially analysed. The 4 transferred individuals were never officially received. If the institution that managed all of this kept any record of its own actions, that record has not surfaced in 80 years of archival work by researchers who were specifically looking for it. Who in the chain of command authorized the erasure, and why does no document say so?